slogans marched. She told Al Jazeera
an interest in preserving their military relationship with Egypt. They also want to protect Israel's interest, a 30-year peace agreement, but also a safe border with Gaza, and not least of all, preserve access to the Suez Canal. So there's an awful lot at stake here.
Nabila,
and no principles.
We're just, forgive me for interrupting, but as you're speaking, we're looking at these live pictures coming out of Cairo on the outskirts of Liberation Square, we should clarify. And we hear gunfire, and we can actually see what looks like petrol bombs being hurled off of a roof. But you were talking about the U.S. and what's at stake here for the U.S. How do you evaluate Washington's response so far to what's happening in Egypt?
I think the speech coming out of Washington has evolved over time. First of all, when the demonstrations started, Washington was still saying that Egypt was pretty stable. And then it clearly asked for President Mubarak to introduce reforms, in an attempt for him to appear to be making concessions. And now they're urging him to move to an orderly transition, whatever that means. But it's all being decided by generals between Washington and Cairo.
And again, those are live pictures. Democracy protesters all seem to be engaged in what appears to be a standoff. There are chants in the background as well.
The grim irony here, and what is absolutely staggering, is that
and his government, Becky Rowland, has been speaking to some of these people in Cairo. So what looks like hundreds of people there well into the night, still out on the streets of Cairo demonstrating. Some for Mubarak, pro-Mubarak protesters out in the street tonight from reports that we're getting, and as well as the pro-democracy supporters, the demonstrators that have been going on for days now. It's the 9th day of protests in the country. We can speak to one of our correspondents in Cairo now to get more on the situation as it's unfolding right in front of our screens. What are you seeing?
Well, I'm just on one of the side streets off the main square, Tahrir Square, and it does seem, or at least it sounds like it's heating up again, just at the tip of that square. From the sound, it sounds like it is the tip that's closest to the Egyptian Museum. That's the area where I think the clashes are taking place, not really in the center of the square itself, but on the periphery. And we've heard a string of shots in the last half hour or so. This after a relative lull since the afternoon when these fierce clashes were taking place, not just on the periphery of the square, but they had spread throughout the streets and alleyways, really in central Cairo. And we were hearing also beyond central Cairo, there were also demonstrators, and certainly people in their homes were watching this unfold, incredibly frightened and scared.
And if you can see, or can you see, whether the people there, do they belong mostly to the pro-Mubarak camp, or are they the pro-democracy protesters?
From where I am, it's very difficult to answer that question, because all throughout the day, all I've seen is Mubarak supporters, because I am on the outskirts of the square, and I'm hearing from my colleagues that the pro-democracy supporters are almost cordoned inside the square itself, so I'm not able to see them or their numbers, but I can tell you that throughout the day today there were hundreds of those Mubarak supporters, very, very angry, emphatic. They were shouting that they were going to go towards the square, they were going to make sure that each and every protester is taken out of that square, protesters must go out. It's Mubarak that will stay in.
Okay, and do you see any of the military standing by, and if so, if they're doing anything at this point?
No, I can't see any military or police presence on the street, and the street that I'm overlooking right now is really the scene of some of the fiercest clashes that we've seen this evening. And all throughout the day, I've been reporting that there hasn't been much military involvement. They were sort of coming into the street, driving their tanks to separate the anti and pro-government supporters, but they would retreat after a few minutes, really causing just more havoc. So it almost seemed like a situation whereby the military was going to intervene and then they didn't, as if they couldn't make up their minds. But certainly we've seen some really fierce clashes here. We've seen some people being beaten up right at the door of some of these tanks, and the soldiers have not come out. They're clearly sending a message that they will not be getting involved in these clashes.
And are there casualties? I mean, you talk about fierce clashes that you saw. Have you seen any casualties?
Yes, I mean, I've been here now for about 8 hours, and I've seen dozens of people injured. Nothing that I could say was life-threatening, but injuries that I assume are caused by the flying rocks, people who clearly had been stumbled on. That was a huge problem at the beginning of the day. This is how this whole thing started. As the Mubarak supporters approached Tahrir Square, and these rocks started flying from all directions. And when I say rock, I don't mean these little pebbles. I mean basically bits of the pavement and the road that had been taken apart and were being hurled at the other side. So that caused somewhat of a stampede, and I'm sure that people were injured in that. I myself was hit in the eye as I was trying to run back. And what happened was that there were cordons all the way around Tahrir Square, and so people were getting stuck in those cordons and being squashed. So I can only imagine that there were many injuries. Myself, I saw dozens of them.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. Our correspondent there telling us about the fierce clashes that she's witnessed throughout the day in Cairo. We can now speak to Bassem Sati. He's one of the protest leaders in the anti-Mubarak camp and joins us on the line from Cairo. Tell us if you are out in the streets at this particular moment and what you're seeing if you're out.
Actually, I've been in Tahrir Square for all the day, and I just left 1 hour ago or something.
Okay, and before you left, what was the situation in Liberation Square?
It was simply a civic war, but not a civic war because we have two groups of people of two different opinions, but because simply the policemen were clothing the plain clothes. That's why it seemed like two huge groups of people with two different opinions. They are throwing stones and beating each other.
So from what you're saying that there were policemen, in fact, in Liberation Square, plainclothes policemen.
Yes, plainclothes policemen, and even we caught them with their IDs, and they were attacking the anti-Mubarak protesters in Tahrir Square.
Okay, and what were the pro-democracy protesters doing when they were being attacked?
Actually, it was a fight. It was a fight because the pro-democracy protesters, they were sitting in Tahrir Square for like 5 days so far, and the others was having a very clear strategic goal or objective is to get them out from Tahrir Square by any cost, even if it's the blood.
How prepared were the pro-democracy protesters in Liberation Square? Because we heard reports all day that the pro-Mubarak demonstrators protesters were entering Tahrir Square armed with weapons and knives, and we even saw footage of them charging in camels and horses. So how prepared were the pro-democracy protesters?
Actually, it was shocking in the morning. Nobody imagined that Mubarak will use such dirty game or will play such dirty game. And today we got casualties equal to the day of Friday. However, on Friday we were fighting the Central Security Forces using the bombs and the tear gas bombs and live bullets and rubber bullets. But today the thugs who were using the white weapons, the knives and swords and the stones actually made a lot of casualties before among the pro-democracy protesters. It was a war.
Are you aware, or did you hear, or perhaps did you see any other clashes or battles going on outside of Liberation Square?
Sorry?
Did you see any clashes going on outside of Liberation Square in the suburbs and other neighborhoods?
Some people went outside, some went inside. It was a total mess, and actually I can describe exactly who is where and the motion of the people around and inside the square.
We're just looking at live pictures there, Bassem, as you're speaking to us and telling us what you saw earlier on this evening. The situation doesn't seem to be calming down at all. Before you left Liberation Square, were there more people still walking into the square trying to get in?
While I was leaving, those who were trying to get in, they were very few numbers compared with in the morning. And now I got a lot of phone calls from inside the square that it's now somehow calmed down. Of course, the situation now in Tahrir is not that good like what it was through the last week. No life in Tahrir Square. The environment is totally an environment of war. The lights of the square are off. The protesters now are somehow putting some shield or something because they are expecting any attack through the night. So it's not that comfortable like it was through the last few days, and it's not protected by the army like it was.
Okay, Bassem, thank you very much for talking to us here on Al Jazeera. Well, we can take a look at where things stand at the moment in Egypt after a day of high drama, as we're saying. Well, Wednesday has seen clashes near Cairo's Liberation Square between what appears to have been pro- and anti-government protesters. The two sides have pelted each other with stones and petrol bombs, and in the past hour, more gunfire has been heard from the area. Well, Egyptian authorities say that more than 600 people have been injured in those clashes, and in the past hour, as we're saying, the country's newly appointed Vice President, Omar Suleiman, he said that there will be no political dialogue